meeting as normal. Firstly, we'll go through apologies, minutes, declarations of interest. There are no public questions and no in the gallery. We'll wrap that all out in about 5 minutes. Progress update will take 5 minutes to look through. 10 minutes on point 6, committee's work plan and forward plan, and then budget proposals. So we're focusing on the process of setting a legal budget rather than any drama we might want to intervene for full council. Let's go for 20 minutes and see how we get on. Asset management and property rationalisation, another 20. Half hour on the quarterly performance report because there's a lot of information. Floating bridge will not be a rerun of our favourite hits of the floating bridge. It will be to see what information we've got and any further needed. 20 minutes and then 15 at the end for members' question time. So apologies.
Chairman, we've got apologies from Councillor John Medland, and for substitutes, we've got Councillor Rodney Downer instead of Councillor David Adams.
Thank you. The minutes, is everyone happy that the minutes are a true representation? We have a proposer, seconder. Marvellous. Go. Any declarations of interest? No public questions, so into the progress update. Hopefully you've all had a chance to have a read of the progress update. There's quite a lot we've got going on there. Anything anybody wants to bring up? Cameron.
Just under the progress update, it mentions in regards to the forward plan regarding the disposal of potential housing sites in East Cowes, for us to have a written explanation around this. I also would like to question this in a sense that as town councillors, we were informed of the Maresfield site, what that site is going to be, and the plans for that, but this committee weren't informed about that. So obviously it'd be good to know about that process, the process that is undertaken, how we are informed, Cabinet are informed, but also as town and parish councillors separately away from this committee, why we are being informed of things that this committee aren't. And I feel like we should be on a level playing field here.
Okay, yeah, we'll take that under asset management. Yeah, thank you, Cameron. Anybody else?
Excuse me. Thank you, Chair. On the point about the East Cowes matter, I think I'm right in saying that that's coming before corporate scrutiny in March and before Cabinet in March. Now, given that it includes a written explanation into the rules around confidentiality, to understand why there are different rules for Cabinet and scrutiny, and to put in place a clear policy for all committees to follow, can we have that in advance of the meeting so we're not all sitting there with a complicated document? Because it is becoming, I feel, that we're not really scrutinising in depth because we're always fobbed off. And I, for one, am getting a bit tired of it.
Fair point, Councillor Spink. Yeah, we can make sure that's in the papers.
When those papers will be delivered, and stick to it and call the person here if they're not delivered on that day.
Chairman, there's two options here. Members could ask for that information in advance of publication of the next agenda for the March. Or it can be included within the agenda papers for the March meeting, which will be published 5 clear working days in advance.
I'd prefer it more in advance because I don't, as I think you know, agree with the current approach to confidentiality. And I'd like to see the paper in advance so that I can do something about it prior to the actual meeting of corporate scrutiny, and that I'm not left sitting here with no papers to look at. So could I have it a week in advance, please, of the 5 days? So 10 days before the meeting.
I'll have a discussion, Chairman, with the monitoring officer. If we can't succeed with that, then we'll let you know in advance.
Monitoring officer's here. Could we ask him now?
Thank you. I think at this moment in time, obviously, as members have previously asked for clarity regarding the access to information. So I'll use my reasonable endeavours to meet that timescale in order to bring the necessary clarity to bear. Can't give an absolute guarantee because obviously you know the workload and so forth, but clearly this is a pressing issue which has been raised by the committee before, so I'll do my best to achieve that. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, anything on, oh, sorry, Councillor Lilly, you just nearly missed out there.
I just wanted, it was on the item about the delegated powers, the information. I just wondered if there was any progress. It says internal discussions are taking place. Any more to that?
As I understand it, and I'm sure our monitoring officer will correct me, is that a review has taken place, and we're now just waiting for the next step in terms of the process itself.
Okay.
If I may, thank you. And that is the cancellation of the Tour of Britain. At the last corporate scrutiny committee, we asked if we could see the contract. That hasn't been forthcoming, although there was an email from a member of an officer to say, ask what format we would like it in. I don't really mind as long as we have it, quite frankly. So could we please have that? And no more emails required from us. We've requested it once. I mean, one can't go on issuing emails asking for the same thing.
You can actually.
Anything now on the work programme? Anything to add? Councillor Lilly, I think you had a point to make, didn't you? Mentioned before the meeting.
Yes, I just felt that obviously the recent news of the Isle of Wight NHS Trust and the Portsmouth Trust merger, and there is also a merger between Solent and Southern regarding community and mental health, which would the Isle of Wight NHS Trust will be part of. As I'm also the vice chair of the Adult Social Care and Health, I did speak to Councillor John today, and both agree that perhaps there should be a briefing for scrutiny and adult social care, because I know Paul is looking puzzled, but the reality is that this is a major corporate change which will affect the Isle of Wight Council and the residents, right? It's a major structural thing, and we should have a briefing at least to be able to get up to date with this, because I think a number of us had no knowledge till it was actually publicised on Friday, and it's a huge thing for our residents, and a frightening for many of our residents, these particular changes, and they're quite massive changes in the NHS. And I think, you know, to be sort of just told that we're actually going to be sharing a chief executive, literally sort of like a sleight of hand, we do need to have a briefing to do that in the next, well, I would say in the next few weeks, urgently, within that. Particular health and adult social care and health has a statutory responsibility and has powers. And again, John and I felt, as the chair and the vice chair, as part of the scrutiny chairs, the fact that we had no knowledge and this hadn't been sort of presented actually wasn't good enough, and I think we need to do. That's why I wanted to raise it at this meeting, to say, you know, we need to note this, because there isn't an adult social care and scrutiny committee until March, and I think we can't wait till then.
I think the best bet is that needs to go through Councillor Nicholson. It's only fair because he's chair of health scrutiny, and then we'll see what he recommends about him. Sorry, Karen.
He was in agreement with me, and was in agreement with me to raise it tonight. Thank you.
Chairman,
Obviously, the Policy and Scrutiny Committee for Health and Social Care has the statutory responsibility for health issues, and it is on the agenda, as Councillor Lilly said, for the 6th of March. What we can do, because we do have regular dates for informal meetings with our health partners, is ask for a specific briefing from health partners on this. It did come as a surprise to Councillor Nicholson and to the rest of us. We knew that they were working in partnership with Portsmouth, but we weren't quite aware of how far that partnership had gone. There are separate responsibilities for health scrutiny in respect of mergers, and that will be reported to the committee on the 6th of March.
Conrad, thank you for that. I think it's important, this obviously is in public. Isle of Wight Health Watch, which has statutory responsibilities to, in consultation of residents, is in a network of other health watches that would be involved with this coming out, and none of them have been consulted of that. And I just think that, and they are the body that consults, with residents and that. So there is questions to be asked.
Councillor.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity. I neither knew nothing about it until after the press statement had gone. I knew that they were in discussions about a series of next steps and working in partnership. I knew nothing about that whatsoever. So whilst you're talking about a briefing to yourselves, in fact, it's a briefing to the whole council so that we can be involved. I checked that with Health Watch. So the council, as the council, we are not statutory partners. They don't have to consult with us, but Health Watch are a different ball game altogether. They have a responsibility. And I am dismayed because of the impact that has in the way that Councillor Lilly has described on our island residents. Whilst what you need to do is carry the people along with you in making change rather than them be an afterthought. And what that actually does in my mind is that makes me question the integrated care system significantly in terms of how that's going to be rolled out, about who are the members involved with that and who is making the decisions. Whilst I support the collective on the bigger basis, there needs to be localised modelling, localised involvement, and that is what is missing completely from this action that is taken. Therefore, the press have quite rightly highlighted that, and so have Health Watch. So I welcome the comments here today. I think we're all very much in the same position, that we should have a full explanation of why, how, when, about the process, and what that means for island residents. We should have that properly laid out for us.
Thank you. Any further comments? No? Okay, we'll move on to item 7, budget proposals. I think it's probably fair we let Councillor Jarman start with the process of setting a legal budget, and then I think we get into questions.
Well, I'm very happy to start. I think I'm going to hand over to Chris Ward at some stage just to give him a few moments notice to prepare. He has spoke to this topic a few times, so he's quite expert on it. The good news is that since October, we've been working on this budget, which nobody can be in any doubt of the challenges that we faced on this. And there have been a lot of decisions which we've had to make, which none of us really wanted to make. The reality of the situation is that we had a choice. We had a choice which was expressed, I think, very clearly a number of times. Choice A is that we continue to stand firm at our posts, do our duty and produce a legal budget on behalf of the islanders. And option 2, which was expressed to me in a very colourful way, was that we throw our hands in the air, scream very loudly and run for the top of Tennyson Down. The option we chose was option A, clearly, which is to stand firm with the island and the residents. We know that the alternative, were we not to have a balanced budget and to fall down a different route, would be that the government appointed commissioners would come in ultimately on that tack, would probably make some of the decisions that we ourselves have made, would probably make other decisions which would be more aggressive, and would do it in the absence of any local knowledge, or perhaps with the same degree of care and attention that we've chosen to do it ourselves. So we have an obligation, we're elected for a purpose, that's our role here, and we decided to fulfill that. The good news is that in around 8 months' time, we're going to start that process again. The challenge, of course, now is to agree a budget that will see us through the next year and into that process later this year of continuing the cycle. The disappointment is that we look back a year ago and we see a number of issues that have confronted us during the year, which none of us anticipated as we sat in this chamber last February. None of us anticipated the illegal invasion of the Ukraine by Russia, or the necessary elements that would follow out from that, the consequences regarding materials, particularly foodstuffs, the consequences regarding utilities and utility prices, and the spiral that that's driven into the inflation percentages that we've all become very familiar with. We've had to deal with those during the year. We've also had to deal with the growing issue of our demographics on the island, with our increasingly aged population. I don't see anything changing on any of those in a material way, and that was one of the questions that was also brought up a number of times over the last few months. I don't imagine that Russia is going to throw in the towel, suddenly leave the Ukraine and everything return to a steady state that has existed before. I think this matter will persist with us for some time. The demographics continue to evolve in a very consistent way. We heard earlier today the number of births on the island has been this year so far 23, the number of deaths 47. And if the birth rate continues to fall at that rate, our demographics will continue to skew accordingly. So we do have a number of challenges. We're very familiar with what they are. We've studied those challenges and we've sought to bring forward a budget which prioritizes two very key areas. The first key area, which is a statutory responsibility, is around adult social care. That was clearly a very key focus of the budget consultancy that we've just finished. I was very pleased that the islanders supported that emphasis, which we've driven through, and we've done everything we can to meet the inflationary pressures and demand-driven pressures of adult social care. We perhaps have not met everything which they may have wished for, but I believe we are in this budget delivering everything that they need to continue to provide a robust service for those people within that category. The second issue we've prioritised is that of children's services. Now, again, this was a priority that came out from the consultation. We're very happy to, again, see that reflected in it. And again, it is a statutory responsibility. Beyond that, we have sought to really cut our cloth very closely, understanding that by meeting those statutory responsibilities almost in their fullest measure, that the degree of cost saving and cuts that we've had to introduce are faced disproportionately by the discretionary services that we provide. And some of those are very substantial cuts. In a couple of the budget consultations that we've done online with the town and parish councils, and last night I did one with the business community on the island. We've done others on a more local basis. You know, some areas are facing degrees of cuts which may well be in the range of 30 to 50% of their previous budget. That's necessary. It's necessary so that we can focus on our statutory responsibilities and maintain the appropriate level of care for the aged and more infirm in our society and for the children who desperately depend on us. So those are the core guiding principles that we've carried with this. We've also sought to engage internally with the other groups here and the ungrouped members of the council. I think I've met with all the groups and with all the individuals, some of them more than once. We've got further meetings that are planned going forward up to the day of the budget. We've also got further information that we're continuing to address as they bring forward questions to us. And I'm being very open in my communication of those facts and figures when they're requested. There is absolutely no purpose at all in us trying to hide or in any way diminish the stresses that we face as a council. We've also had a number of times the question of, and I use the exact words that were given to me, is why bother given that we're going to be in the same position, perhaps even a worse position, come the end of the year? And the answer is because we care for the people who elected us and their well-being. And that's an obligation that every one of the members of this council took on when they stood for election. And when they were elected, they signed a bit of paper that recognised the role that they would play going forwards. And so we feel compelled to continue this process across the chamber, involving everybody in what for us is a very stressful situation. There will be light at the tunnel. It may not be very clearly visible yet, may well be some way off, but the key thing is to maintain, for the best reason we can, best level of service for the island's residents and businesses. So, not beating about the bush here and being very open about things, I believe the budget that we've presented supports all of those ambitions. There may be some nuances in it which individuals, one way or the other, may wish to address. But holistically, the budget is there. It meets those priorities. It meets our obligation. We will be commending it to the main chamber through Cabinet later this week. And I think beyond that, I'll hand over to Chris, and I'm sure he'll add a great more detail to the budget proposal and the methodology.
Through you, Chair. Thank you. Well, there's no doubt that the budget proposal before you has actually been quite a challenging one to produce. You'll have heard me speak previously about the extent of what we described as the unfunded budget pressures that face the council. They were coming through towards the back end of last year at about 20 million. I think I mentioned in the budget report that was 10 times what we actually thought might occur in terms of the budget savings that were required for next year. So the scale and the pace at which the inflationary and demand pressures came at the council during the year was really quite significant. Excuse me. But what you do have before you is a budget proposal for next year that is balanced, and more than that, I think it's what I describe as structurally balanced, which means that you've got to a position where your in-year spending is matched by your in-year funding. That's quite an achievement and brings you back onto the trajectory that you were at prior to this hyperinflationary environment. Hasn't come without its pain, of course, because you'll see within the budget proposals themselves, there's £3.9 million worth of savings contained within there. And that was obviously necessary as the gap in order to resolve after additional funding had come through from government through the settlement in order to bring you back to structural balance. I do make the point in the budget report, which I also think is important, that it has been a test of this council's financial resilience. Without the government intervention and the government support, the council wouldn't have had the financial resilience to be able to accommodate £20 million worth of budget pressures in the year. That has led me, amongst other things within the recommendations, to suggest that the council's minimum level of reserves needs to increase. Learn anything from last year, we've learned that there is a vulnerability to the council's overall financial resilience, and I can't say that some of that uncertainty doesn't exist going into next year, because it does, which is also a reason why the proposals put before you increase the council's excuse me, level of in-year contingency within the budget from 3.5 million to 4 million to provide an additional level of prudence for the volatility that we might inevitably face. If we look forward, as I said earlier on, I think that the proposal before you has kept you on the same trajectory that you were on before, which was broadly a £2 million per year budget saving as we look forward. Now that £2 million will probably always happen. I mentioned earlier that you're in structural balance, but each and every year, just inflationary costs alone are likely to exceed the pace at which your funding increases. That in part is because council tax, which is a large proportion of the council's funding base now, which is close to 60%, that is usually capped, and it's usually capped below inflation, which inevitably then leaves you with a gap between your spending, even just at inflationary levels, and your funding. That said, the council has brought itself with these proposals back into structural balance. There is the prospect of £2 million worth of savings each and every year for the next 3 years. And there's also uncertainty attached with that forecast because there are a number of uncertainties on the horizon. Largest of those obviously are the continuing impact of inflation and demand. We've also still got the legacy of COVID to deal with, which we have got a fund for, but it's a finite fund. We expect that fund to be able to accommodate the legacy impact of COVID for the next 3 years, but nothing beyond that. And finally, the other large uncertainty for us is what happens with local government reform. 2025-26, there's expected to be a review of the local government funding system. That covers the grant funding that local authorities get, as well as how local authorities receive income from business rates. You may have noticed in the report that at the moment the council is benefiting from £10 million worth of growth in business rates. As part of the local government reform, that will be removed from councils, all councils, and then redistributed based on a formula that is intended to redistribute based on need. We don't know whether we'll be a winner or a loser out of that process, so it does present a risk going forward, which is why we say there's a potential margin of error on the forecast going forward. So many reasons to remain prudent as we go forward, and I'm pleased that the proposals before you present a legally balanced budget, obviously, and one that has got a good degree of prudence contained within it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris's. Any questions? There must be some.
So at the last iWork Executive Committee meeting, it was recognised the pressure the council are under. However, there was concerns expressed about the ad hoc nature and last minute nature that town and parish council are being asked to financially contribute to council services. So iWork would like to meet with the cabinet to discuss the potential plans of how we can work together going forward financially, whether that's town and parish councils supporting more services that support their community, but also setting out clear lines where we cannot step in and support services here and there. But I think for us as town and parish council, it's really important that dialogue continues as it does, and we aren't getting, emails left, right, and centre very last minute before we set our own budgets about can you support this service financially, and setting out how much each town and parish council should put forwards, because obviously that brings forward issues for us when we are setting our budgets prior to setting yours.
Do you require a response to that, Cameron, or is it just?
It's just more to raise that from our perspective, and making sure that that is taken forward and a meeting does happen.
Okay. Any further questions? Councillor Drew, you just beat Councillor Lilly. Well done.
I'll be brief. I appreciate it's probably something of a pebble in the ocean given the wider context, but my question is, what would you estimate would be the council's real term of inflation that it's experiencing? I assume that it's potentially higher than the headline issue of inflation that the country is experiencing. And I was wondering to what extent, if that is so, is there a degree in which suppliers are potentially using this opportunity to price gouge to a certain extent, or is that something that's perhaps not relevant or essentially de minimis?
So we've had this discussion, as you can imagine, a number of times on the 5th floor here and within each of the portfolios. My view is that what we are doing is we are recognizing a number of pressure points, sub-pressure points within the markets in which we operate. So if I look at adult social care, clearly there was an increase that was given into adult social care during the COVID time, and there was an expectation as time went on that that would be grandfathered in to the overall rate. Clearly there is an increase which is expected in terms of remuneration rates against the living wage and other such indices, and largely those are being met. So I haven't seen anything above that, which has been an undue pressure at the moment. What I have seen is people being realistic at times. I have seen instances where suppliers are unable to continue financially, and we've had a number of failures within the adult social care sector. Some of that is due by the fact that it is increasingly difficult for a care provider to operate a facility with 10, 15 or 20 beds. Clearly the break-even point for operating that on economies of scale is much larger. In terms of our packages that we have a shared responsibility on, some of those we've had some difficulty in obtaining the level of detail that we would require. For example, where there's a relationship with our colleagues in Portsmouth. I know that some of my cabinet colleagues have pressed very hard to get detailed breakdowns of time and expenditure on those, and perhaps we haven't always been able to achieve the level of distinctiveness that we would like within those figures. But overall, no, I've not seen any gouging exercise at all. There is increasing evidence, which we've put forward as an island many times now for many years, of the price differential overall that we face. So we know that if I want to go buy a piece of timber from Hearst's or from one of the other merchants, I know that the price of that is likely to be larger than it would be if I was on the other side of the water in Portsmouth. We also have a continuing issue with employment availability on the island, which is why it surprises me that we have 3.7% of the island are economically inactive, a figure which has actually gone up recently. It often does during the winter, but given the number of vacancies that we have, it surprises me that those people are not able to move quite rapidly into other forms of employment. And I would hope that, you know, the continued trend long term would be they do gain long-term employment that is both fulfilling and rewarding economically. So the island has a number of challenges broadly, which push our inflation in a different way perhaps than the mainland does. When I look at the overall figure that I saw the other day from local authorities, they were quoting about 14%. I don't think we have a distinctive figure just for the island.
Councillor Lilly.
Thank you. Chair, I have 3 specific questions. The first one is, if you look at page 264, there's a nice little diagram which says about type of saving. It's in the cabinet paper, it's on the budget, right? Right. And there's a diagram which has got type of savings, and it says 16% service reduction, additional income 31%, efficiency 52%, right? Taking the notes, what Mr. Ward has sort of said, these assumptions have to be very, very tight. They have to have clear evidence behind them. So I'm just going to take one particular one that digs a little bit deeper on the 31%. The budget has assumptions of income generations, including white care and leisure services. What action is being taken to make sure targets are hit? Because there isn't much room for error on this in the next 12 months, right? So that's my first specific question. Thank you.
Mike, put your mic on.
I'll address it generally and then hand over to my colleagues who might want to address their individual portfolios. I'm sure they will. So going forwards, we know the margins are very tight. There's no doubt about that at all. For the budget to be accepted, we and Chris Ward need to be able to believe and indeed assert that those are reasonable assumptions that we're making and that they are deliverable. So there's been a lot of exercise about the deliverability of it and the timing of it. If we look at the individual areas, we have launched a number of business reviews of those individual functions. Those so far have included the white care operation, bereavement services, and indeed we've got more which are planned at the moment around leisure, and there will be more going forwards. I think we will have the opportunity as we get more into the detail of examining those cost bases to help those business units understand their full cost base in a way that we are able to take elements which might in the past have been absorbed into some corporate bucket, is the typical word that's used, whereas in reality, many of those costs are specific to an individual business unit so that they can understand as a distinctive business unit what their costs and incomes are. So I think Julie wants to add something specific on her area.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Yeah, regarding One Leisure, as a bit of background, you'd be aware pre-pandemic, it was bringing in roughly £300,000 profit, which went to support other council services. And of course, as we all know, the ability to keep oneself fit and healthy and deliver statutory duties, like for instance, young people, primary school children, being able to swim, which is statutory duty for education. That's so one of our core activities at One Leisure. So it's not, as I know, Councillor Jarman sees very clearly as a business unit, and it's a service in my eyes that has other aspects to it as well that support wider well-being and statutory duties in our community. Your specific question, though, Councillor Lee, yes, we suffered obviously having to close during the pandemic, and I think last year the budget forecast of our recovery was perhaps a little bit over sort of generous, really, given the reality of the situation. But we still are recovering on that, and that's being covered, as you know, within the COVID recovery. So a piece of work started back in November. We're still working on bringing an options report that will come to cabinet, looking at the broad of the service itself and all the data. For instance, we're looking at what latent demand there is. I mean, sadly, the news at Gurner Pines with that facility closing, many people have now come over to One Leisure and seeing what fantastic services we've got there. We've got a marketing team now. We've got a very good offer coming out next week. In fact, some of you may be interested. We've got you get 1 month free if you buy a contract gold card, so it's very good value. If you've not been around our leisure centres, I would really encourage all of you to go and visit. So yeah, we run very lean, so there's no no fat to cut as such. In fact, we're going to have to look at employing some more people just to better cover the extra uptake of services there. So having very lean during this year, but also you need to have specialised staff on hand to be able to deliver these health outcomes for people. So you know me, I could talk for ages about this, but hopefully I've answered your question, Councillor Lee, that we're on it and constantly on it.
Question 2.
This is in relation to statutory services, particularly children's services, which are a constant moving feast, really. And obviously, nationally, we have a situation of children coming into the care system, which the statutory have to pay for. So my question is the government last week put a response to the Josh McAllister report, and my particular question here is, What are the financial consequences of that? Because in that response, they were talking about things actually happening now from February, as well into the next financial year. And I just wondered whether those considerations had been taken into this a budget within that. As I say, you have the government suddenly descends on it. Basically, my grandmother always said, when you think the ends meet, someone moves the ends. And I think this constantly happens with the budget. So that's my specific question. Have we taken in consideration the government's response? Josh McAllister.
Councillor Andre.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for that question. I think it's already been mentioned that it has been an incredible challenge getting to this point with the budget, partly because of that reason, that it does seem to be an ever-moving feast. It's also been mentioned that there are statutory services that we have to provide, but we don't always get the corresponding funding from government. In children's services alone, over 290 statutory functions. You mentioned the McAllister report. The final report and recommendations only came out 5 days ago. It focuses, as you would expect, not so much. The actual report itself does not focus on the financial aspects. I'm quite happy to give a written response. I think your question was, has it been factored in? Well, I think that's, we've already said, we are being as flexible as we possibly can with the moving situation. In terms of the review, it focuses on 10 main areas: helping families, keeping children safe, making good use of family networks, adoption, transforming care, listening to children's voices, protecting care experienced people from stigma and discrimination, moving on, i.e. helping children to move on, helping the workforce to be the best it can be, and making sure the system is focused on children and families. As I've said, I'm prepared to give a more detailed written response, but I can reassure members that we are already putting measures into place. For example, in the last financial year, Children's Services introduced the Modernising Placements programme, which goes into the transforming care element of the review, which has seen a different, more effective, both financially, but obviously the important thing for us is that we have the right provision for our island children. We have been able to make greater efficiencies without impacts on the service. We've had a big push on recruiting additional fostering families through our brilliant fostering recruitment hub team, because the more families that we actually have as a council reduces the cost pressures of going to independent fostering agencies. We've also, within the last couple of years, become members of Adopt South, which combines adoption services in a regional structure to get those to be able to have greater access to placements within that regional structure and economies of scale. So, as I say, I am prepared to give a written response, but I hope that gives members confidence that we are already in lots of areas actually ahead of the game. Thank you.
Question 3, Councillor Lilly.
That's right. This is going on to a particular sort of budget heading. It's about the specific grants through about the Stroke Association, right? I have been contacted, I think a lot of other members have been contacted about that have suffered strokes and their families, who are particularly concerned about possible loss of that service. My particular question really is, has there been a full study of the impact of the loss of that service? I know it's a contract, right? And has there been discussions, and particularly through the bodies like Health Watch, in I believe that the Stroke Association helps about 300 residents a year. How are those residents and future residents are going to be supported without that particular service? I recently went to a funeral of one of my residents who actually died through a stroke about 3 years ago, and I know actually the need and the support that was actually needed for her and her family during that particular time. I just really want to, I'm not questioning necessarily the cut or the saving. I want to know, has there been analysis of the impact on that? Thank you.
Laura, it's a fight between Councillor Love and Laura Gordian.
So just to fill in, we're very familiar with the organisation Stroke. We've done a lot of more detailed analysis today following the articles. We've all received many communications on the topic. We are aware that Stroke, in the UK has an income in the last accounts last year of 41 million, a surplus of about 9 million as an organisation. And yes, they are an organisation with whom we have a contract, which I think Laura will speak to in more depth in a moment. So we value their service. We have a long-term contract with them that goes into the summer. There's a great deal of misinformation, which has come out very quickly in the last couple of days, and we will need to address that. So I think at this stage, I'll hand over to Laura, and then if she can hand back to me, or Carl, that would be great.
Laura?
Sorry, I was having technical difficulties pressing all of the buttons. I can confirm that a full equality impact assessment has been undertaken in relation to this proposal. That assessment has been undertaken with our partners to ensure that we've covered everything, and I have confidence that equality impact assessment is robust and provides the necessary detail that's required. The contract we have with the Stroke Association is due to expire in June of 2023. We would be in a position where we would need to re-tender that service, and having tendered it on a number of occasions in the past, we've always found it challenging to find somebody who can deliver that service outside of the incumbent provider. It's really important that we're very clear as to what this service is. People who suffer stroke and their families on the island will continue to receive the really important support that they need at that pivotal point during their life. This doesn't impact on the clinical support that's available through the NHS Trust and through our health partners. This is an ancillary community-based resource. The contract that the local authority holds has predominantly two key areas where we ask the provider to deliver. The first is in relation to advice and to guidance and welfare and support calls. And the second is to support carers of people who've suffered a stroke, who invariably are relatively new to a caring role. The Stroke Association have been fantastic partners in this space and have for a number of years delivered this service in innovative ways on the Isle of Wight. However, the pandemic saw a significant shift in the way in which they were able to do that. And pre-pandemic, they used to hold coffee mornings where people could drop in and interact. And since COVID-19, the people who've survived strokes and their families have taken it upon themselves to develop their own network of peer support. That network of peer support is proving to be far more effective and enabling greater levels of support to people in their own home than we were seeing through the drop-in sessions. The Stroke Association has worked really closely with local partners and has enabled those partners to upskill, for want of a better word, their own resources to better support people who have stroke. The removal of the funding in relation to this area isn't something that's been taken lightly, and we have entered into a period of negotiation with the Stroke Association to see if we could reduce the financial envelope rather than removing it. The Stroke Association have been unable or unwilling to work with us in that area, and we've reached a point where we're in a position that the service now has to be terminated at the end of that contract. We're confident that the universal services that have recently been commissioned through Living Well and Early Help, and the services that our excellent Carers Isle of Wight partners provide, are in place to enable full support to be provided to survivors of stroke and to their families moving forward in the community. We've got the opportunity later this year to retender our wider corporate advice, information and guidance service. And as part of that, we'll be able to also consider any specific interventions or needs for people who survive stroke and their family. So in terms of where we are, yes, to answer the very specific question, a full equalities impact assessment has been undertaken. In addition to that, there's been an awful lot of scoping as to other services that are available to support people. And in essence, at this moment in time, we're satisfied that there's a significant element of duplication in this service and other services that are commissioned by the local authority and health partners across the Isle of Wight.
Councillor Love.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I had to read the question. Yes, I think my thank you to Laura for the response. She's done a really good job there. I think the fact is that nobody likes this budget at all. Reality is that this council has lost £93 million over 13 years of austerity, which has been passed along to us through this government, and the pot is empty. That's the bottom line. The pot is empty, and we have little or no choice but to do some things which are unpalatable, and we have to make these changes. So what did that really mean to my team when we first started discussing that? It meant that just to stay where we are, we needed, in my team, £7.7 million to remain just where we are now. And it is with great thanks and a bit of relief that other directorates have taken on the majority of that. They've taken on £7.1 million of cuts in order to remain where we are, without which the cuts would be absolutely devastating. Not that this isn't devastating, but that still left my team with a cut imposed on us by government for austerity of £3 million, of which I had to absorb 1.2. And then the remainder of the 7 million that we've just talked about, 7.7, which was another 500,000. So that was 1.8 million pounds. And you can see that, unfortunately, that what that does to my budgets. I have to, and we will not move away from protecting those who are most vulnerable, that are trapped at home, that need caring in their homes, or caring in care homes. And so that left me with virtually nothing to cut, apart from manoeuvring within what we've currently got. And that is the position we are now in. I hate this budget, as I think that's a good word. I think hate is a good word. I think none of us want to do it. We have fought, argued, questioned, tested, scrutinized, and this is the best that we can come up with now, unless, of course, somebody's going to come up with some positive alternatives that actually make sure that whatever they undo on our side is replaced by the similar equivalent of funding on the other side, because I can't put things in place without more money to replace it. That's the bottom line. So I am grateful to my staff, and I realise that this is probably one of the most difficult things that any of us, particularly I, have ever had to do in setting this budget. So, but it's entirely down to our government not giving us the amount of difference in support that we need as a response to the national emergencies that we're in, and everybody is paying. And I'm incredibly disappointed that we've had to do this, but it's where we are.
Thank you. I will move on. I have one question from either Chris, is what would the additional income need to be to stop any cuts in services or use of reserves?
To stop any cuts in services? Well, we haven't done that analysis, but I would pick a figure that would probably be around 8 million Anybody disagree?
I've got to 9.5. Chris, any advance on 9.5? And I won't hold you to it. It's just because I think we need to get an idea of the scale, because we've discussed a lot of figures and we've talked about a £22 million deficit that we've reduced to an additional 1 million. But the real truth of the matter is it's an order of figure.
But you're not
Councillor Evans.
looking to meet all of the pressures that we have, because many of those were mitigated as well. So
Yeah.
if you wanted to meet all of the pressures that we mitigated and all the other opportunities that were foregoing, and the opportunities, commercial opportunities, of course it would be a much bigger figure. But if you look at the basic of what you've just asked, I'd be comfortable with 8 as that baseline.
Because I'm trying to get a feel for, the additional £1 million that was tossed our way that arrived late wasn't really what it claimed to be. And I think we all need to get our heads around the fact we are extremely short of the lifeblood of this council, which is Councillor Evans.
Yeah, I think that's quite useful sort of sum you came up with, because of course if the government sponsored report by LG Futures into the cost of being of separation, the minimum £10 million, the maximum I think was £63 million per year to deliver service on the Isle of Wight, and that is why we're not giving up on getting our fair funding for the Isle of Wight. But just puts into context, if we had that £10 million, we wouldn't actually be having to do any of those cuts.
Yeah.
You raised the 1 million. I think it's worth drawing out that. So we were aware of the 1 million when it was announced at the very beginning of last year. Of course, 1 million at the beginning of last year, given the rate of inflation, wasn't the same as the 1 million that we actually received in spending power at the end of the year in December. So one could easily argue that although we had £1 million of spending value, say in January, we ended up with maybe 900,000 of spending value at the end of the year. And it took them that long to actually provide us with the money. We are aware that we've got £1 million again in our financial settlement. When we will receive that, I don't know. If we were to receive that, and by the way, that's cash flat, they haven't increased it in line with inflation. If we were to receive that in December of this year, clearly that 1 million of value at the beginning of last year would be even further eroded, might be down to a figure something around 830,000 of spending value, given the expectation of the rate of inflation. So, it's always interesting to think of what that 1 million figure represents, and the differential between the million and what we actually believe that we should be entitled to as an island, and the spending power that it represents to us.
Thank you. So finally, any Councillor Robertson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just on that million that's been talked about quite a lot, I find it remarkable that the council didn't chase the million, and I do worry what message that sends to government. I take the point, and the cabinet members just made it, that government didn't give it, but council didn't chase it, and it's money we badly need on the island. So I would encourage the council to be a bit more proactive in chasing government money, and perhaps borrowing some money for affordable housing as well, because there's below interest rate borrowing available, and the council hasn't touched a single penny of that from last year's budget.
I think the drama of full council is where that needs to go, because I think I have my very own opinions of what you just said, Councillor Robertson, but I will save them for then. Any outcomes or other comments on item 7, the budget? Any outcomes from the? Okay, we shall move on. Thank you all. Go on then, you're just in the nick of time.
Just on the outcomes, I mean, I think it is important for this committee to monitor through the quarterly performances, particularly target figures on income and generations. And I think we have got to actually do it on a regular basis. I know the chair of audit is very much viewing it on a, I know Councillor Jarman, on a monthly basis. But I think that we definitely, as this committee, need to really track and actually ask questions, are things on target? Because if those figures of income generation and efficiencies are not met, then we are going to be in a very difficult position next year. We need to be keeping track on those, and I think we have a responsibility as corporate to actually really track those. That should really be part of our work plan.
Yeah, and I think also it's for the relevant scrutiny committees to track each of theirs as well, so it's not a job entirely. Okay, thank you. Moving on to item 8, asset management and property rationalisation. Who's taking that one?
I should have my red light on, shouldn't I?
Thank you, Chris, and through you, Chair. Thank you. I think committee asked for some key questions in relation to the asset management property rationalisation agenda. Hopefully this paper provides them with the answers to those questions. How committee then wants to proceed. Obviously, we're happy to support and advise going forward. I think the paper is a very useful one because it summarises 3 key aspects really of what property and assets are about. Operational delivery of the council services, delivering the corporate plan objectives of the administration, and obviously crucially securing best value from what is obviously a very fixed and valuable asset. So yeah, happy to deal with any questions the committee might have at this juncture. And obviously Ashley is our Assistant Director on properties here as well. But obviously happy to take any questions now or deal with the issue in future as and when the committee requires.
Cameron, did you want to restate your point that you made?
So it was just over the point, obviously earlier had been mentioned about Kingston Marine Park, but with other sites that are coming up, about this committee being equally as informed as we are as town and parish councillors as well, in that formal capacity of sites. Obviously, it's also a question to the monitoring officer about what we are allowed to know, what is confidential, what isn't, and making sure there's consistency across the council's committee as well as conversations with us town and parish councillors.
Are you able to respond to that, Chris?
Only refer to my colleague, the monitoring officer, and obviously as he's committed earlier to give some exploratory discussion on that at a future date.
Any further questions on asset management, property rationalisation? Councillor Spink, Councillor Billy, Councillor Crook.
Thank you, Chair. I think I've got 3 or possibly 4 questions, if I may, please. The first question, which is a general question, and I don't know if it's the Cabinet or Mr. Ashman who best answer this, but does the Cabinet, so probably the Cabinet, does the Cabinet have a policy of keeping council-owned land and utilising it for social housing for rent? In other words, the old-fashioned council housing, because I understood that they did, but I can see no evidence of that either in what has been done over the last 18 months, nor can I see any evidence of that in this paper. So that's my first question.
So normally I'd hand over at this point to Ian Stevens, and no doubt he would give you a very comprehensive reply. The bottom line is we do have an aspiration to continue to use the site to its maximum value and to deliver housing where it's suitable for that.
Just for one item in there, called Shanklin Spa. You know, that's been got housing from that as part of the deal, and there will be also Part Hotel as well, so offering holiday accommodation. But I say we have got as part of the deal, we've actually got some accommodation of that. Yeah, we always think about housing opportunities, but it has to be a site by site decision. Really, every site is very different, and obviously, you know, it's council policy that we enact council. So all that.
Well, my only concern is, because as I say, my main concern is that in a paper setting it out what the council policy or the cabinet policy is, I can't see any mention of it. So that, if I could flag that up as a serious concern, and perhaps when he's here, Councillor Stevens can explain, because all I've witnessed so far is proposals to dispose of council property which this committee and others are not permitted to see the detail.
Chris Ashman, I think, wants to respond.
Just if I could refer the member to the housing strategy, which sets out that ambition of the administration. Obviously, the paper that is in front of us today is actually been scoped around operational delivery.
Second question is, and on my hobby horse, which I am on a little bit today, of things taking an absolute age, I noticed that this agenda item was, the paper we're looking at now, was requested according to the agenda by this committee on the 12th of April 2022. Is that not correct? You look
Chairman,
shocked.
that was the point, that it was agreed to include the item in the work plan and it had to be formally scoped and it was included for this meeting.
It's taken almost a year to scope it.
It's taken, well, it's taken that time to actually scope and also include it in the work plan.
Well, my question then is this. It's very difficult, perhaps it's a statement, but I'll ask it in this way and then say, is it not afterwards? It's very difficult for corporate scrutiny properly to scrutinize things when it's included in an agenda almost a year later than having requested it. And I would ask, please, that things are done a little more in a little more of a timely fashion to enable corporate scrutiny to actually do something. My third question.
Before you move on, Councillor Speak, you can actually come back and scrutinise it at any future corporate scrutiny meeting if you have questions. It's not a gone and.
No, I do agree, Chair, but it
forget.
doesn't help if corporate scrutiny raises a matter last year.
But it was asked to be included in the work plan last year.
Last year, in April.
It has to be included. This bit is important. I'm sorry to go on about it, but it was asked to be included in the work plan. We've asked for stuff to be included in the work plan right up to September 2024. I don't expect officers to be doing much about that just yet, especially on the back they've been spending their time preparing the budget. So I get what you're saying, but we're getting to a stage where we're going to actually have to have officers to produce reports on something we haven't asked for yet to meet the timescale you're asking for. That's the danger.
Okay,
Carry
no,
on.
I take that point. My third question, please, is this, that in the report, there's a rationalisation of operational properties. Is it considered necessary for this council, given that a number of officers work from home, understandably now, is it considered necessary for us to have County Hall, which in my view appears to be empty a lot of the time, C close, and in addition, a facility for our telephone reception at Westridge Farm and Westridge Centre. Okay. Okay. Well, there it is. Is it considered that we really need those three areas? And if not, is anything being done about it?
Chris.
Chris has dealt with this today, so.
In relation to the question, member, we continue to rationalise and seek opportunities for our action. The property agenda, which we are currently progressing, focuses on County Hall as the permanent base, and actually moving forward from exiting other leases and opportunities that can be a challenge for us. So we continue to look at it, and we'll.
Your next question.
Well, only a follow on from that. Can you give any time indication as to time when a decision might be taken? Do we just throw it into the long grass yet again? A decision about County Hall that I've just asked my question about. County Hall, C Close and Westridge.
Right, I think Mr. Ashman just answered your question. It's an ongoing rationalisation, but that is ongoing. So there is no sort of beginning or end to it as our needs change, and as we're still coming out of the pandemic. I think you maybe undervalue what County Hall means to civic life of the island, and also to Newport and the economic role it plays as well. I mean, those who are sort of new to the island maybe don't quite understand how important County Hall is, and the shared service we run from here as well. So it's not as simple as like, oh, I think it's empty, therefore we don't need it. That's not true.
Well, I would only ask you this. There is a cost of living crisis, and the Isle of Wight Council is having great difficulty in setting a budget. And to sit back, if I may say so, and say that it's part of an ongoing strategy with no time plan that can be told to me today is, if I may say so, irresponsible. If you're suggesting that I'm a new member to the Isle of Wight, I'm not. And secondly, well, the importance of County Hall, you say, to the Isle of Wight. I'm not saying that County Hall should be the one that should go, but given that it's empty much of the time, do we need Sea Close and do we need Westridge? And when will something be rationalised about it, or is it going to be kicked into the long grass again?
I will indulge you for a minute, because we are going around in circles, which happens quite often. Is that it's part of the strategic plan, Councillor Spink, and I suggest, if you want to understand the strategic plan, is spend time with Mr. Ashman, so you know exactly what the disposal is. We're talking as if a decision has been made to dispose of County Hall and everyone's sat in their hands. As far as I'm aware, it's not happened, because it's not something I want to have. Or you ask for a time frame of when the decision would be made. But anyway, we'll move on from this because I don't think we're getting anywhere. So you finish your questions, we'll move on. So we've got Councillor Lilly, Councillor Quirk, then Cameron, and then Councillor Robertson.
Me, thank you. Completely different question. On the report, I want to sort of link on page 48 about brownfield sites, and also link that to my question 58 of work with town councils and others. It's very clear in the budget that there is going to be a significant reduction in the maintenance of a lot of assets. We haven't necessarily got the funding to keep those going. And you've actually got in 60 an example of Ryde Harbour, for instance, of that. Is there going to be specific work with town and parish councils, right? Because this seems to be direction on specific assets and parks, parks in my area, the Canoe Lake, and different things that actually are very important to the community, but are not necessarily, for the reasons of the pressures on the Isle of Wight Council, able to maintain. That we have a lot of conversations, much more than this list of ones over the last year, to actually start to move those things into a much more sustainable way, and perhaps finding sustainable solutions at local levels, town and parish councils. And that also links with the conversation about brownfield sites, because actually on the ground there are lots of brownfield sites which could access the Brownfield Land Release Fund. I looked it up recently. You can go on the government website. I think I got the impression that actually town and parish councils could apply directly themselves to actually fund, but I think they need the support of the unitary authority.
Question.
Well, the question is are we having the talks now with town and parish councils about assets, and also how can we get brownfield sites in areas, particularly the urban areas like Ryde, Sandown and everything, to actually get funds to actually develop those sites? And so I want to know, what is the strategy with town and parish councils in doing that? Because we've got some good examples.
Let's go to an answer, Councillor Lilly. Let's go to an answer. Would you like to take that?
So the answer is yes. it is essential that we reinvigorate those discussions with town, parish and community councils regarding the assets on this island, which are effectively cost centres to this council, and which local town, parish and community councils can take forwards in a much more real way, which meets the needs of their communities. And those town, parish and community councils have the means to do that. Indeed, I should probably declare an interest at this point that as a member of Totland Parish Council, Totland Parish Council is doing exactly that. It's been in advanced discussions to take on a site which it will demolish and on which it will build a new community facility and housing. Those plans are quite advanced. So, you know, the roadmap is there. It simply needs the will and the engagement from both those town, parish, community councils and the Isle of Wight Council to make it happen. We're determined to do so.
It's an open door and a two-way street.
Thank you. Councillor Quirk.
Page 50, item 56, 57, Kingston Marine Park. We've resolved to dispose of the site to enable the development. Do we have heads of terms that defines what's going to happen? And if so, can we see them?
Yeah, and I gave an update at Cabinet last month, but Mr. Ash, have you got anything more to add to that update I gave at
There's
Cabinet?
nothing further to add to your statement.
Yeah, so I gave an update last month.
So we have signed heads of terms.
We're just finalising the heads of terms, but there's already the Meet the Buyer event is happening soon. So with the all supply chain, so yeah, I think we're getting near to signing. I understand. Yeah.
My point is, it's probably the wrong way round to decide to dispose of the site before you've got a heads of terms as to what's going to. You've made a formal decision.
Don't think there are any major issues there actually. So all go in the right direction. Nothing to worry about.
So when the heads of terms are signed, can we see it?
When it's ready, yeah. When it's obviously it's sensitive at the minute, but yeah, as soon as it's all done and dusted, of course.
Thank you, Councillor Quirk. Cameron.
Councillor Lilly touched on most of it, just about that engagement with town and parish council. I feel like the council need to reach out to them to make them feel that opportunity's there. We did it the other way around in East Cowes. We reached out to you about the green spaces that we wanted to take over. I think some town and parish council may be worth reaching out to them and say, we've got these, possibilities for you to take on these assets, but making sure that they're aware that those availabilities are there.
I think. Oh, sorry, Chris. I think it's also up to local, because I think sometimes the council can't always see the local opportunity, whereas a local town, parish, community council can actually go, do you know what, we know what we can do with this. So I think that's why it's really important that it's a two-way street, absolutely. And and of course we've got IWOC that are very useful and a helpful organisation on the island that that can help broker some discussions as well.
So the topic has come up in a number of the IWOC meetings going back last summer, back to the spring, I think. We did collate a list of assets, and I know the IWOC members have a list of those assets that we'd like to take forward discussions on. So we're trying to be constructive, we're trying to lead that discussion and help them to help us.
Are you happy, Cameron? Would you like a particular outcome? Or are you happy with that? Thank you. Councillor Robertson. Well done, you saved some time. I've been asked for a comfort break for 5 minutes. So if we get back at 25 past exactly, because I'll be starting no matter what, if that's okay with everyone. Just Jim, 5 minutes. Eyes down, look in. Go for a full house this time. Let's see if we can get through everything by 7. So item 9, quarterly performance reports, lots of information. I don't think we need to go through it line by line, but who wants to take that?
I thought we were going through it line by line, Chair.
Now is no time for humour.
Well, I'm happy to go through it in section by section if you'd like, or if there are any questions on it, just leave it as broad as that, whichever way you'd like to take it.
I'm tempted to go with questions because I know a lot of people have been through, but would anybody like to go through it section by section? Is anybody coming?
I have had a couple of questions which have been posed to me about it, and I can address them here. I think they would equally come up at the cabinet meeting, and perhaps this forum will give more of an opportunity to discuss them if we wanted to. So some of them related to historic decisions that have been taken and the outfall of those in terms of the economics. And undoubtedly, there's no point in me engaging in a process of going back and decrying decisions that were making many years ago. I simply have to deal with the outturn in terms of those economics. That's the reality of it. It achieves nothing. If I look at, for example, on page 57, and I think this is quite important because this is a very clear reflection of the scale of the pressures that we've been facing over this year, and the reason why we've had to build in more of an allowance next year in terms of our flexibility. These are astronomical numbers for us to absorb. And so I would reflect that they are net pressures in adult social and children's services, and clearly the actual pressure is bigger. So adult social care was about 5 million. There were some things that were used to offset against that in terms of staff, etc. And we come to a net pressure of 4. Within children's services, that number has changed on a very regular basis as the year has progressed, and is indeed quite volatile. We have individual care cases where the figure involved with an individual can be upwards of £1 million. So one or more coming into that pressure makes a huge difference. What we are aware of within those areas is because of the demographics, we know that the demand on adult social care and the pressure on that is going to continue. That's not something we need to speculate about. We can debate about what the scale of that, magnitude of that might be, but we know that the pressure will continue, and we've tried to account for that. The same with children's services. We know that coming forward from different areas of the island, and indeed a different hat that I from time to time wear, we know that there are a number of issues within children's services that are likely to put increased pressure on that budget over the next year, and we've tried to take account for those. So it's, the figures we have, until the day that something actually happens and until we get an invoice for it, it's not a real number. They are always estimates and projections, and that's the nature of what budgeting is here. So we've tried to account for what we can during the year. If we find that those pressures are less than we've anticipated, then we will have more latitude to engage on other discretionary elements, but we can't guarantee that. We've also had to make sure that at the end of the day, we have a bit of paper, which, although he's departed now, our 114 officer will actually put his name to. So that, and I don't want to understate the importance of that move. But at the end of the day, us coming forward with something and with a proposal that we think is reasonable is not sufficient. He, at the end of the day, as our Chief Finance Officer, has to put his name to that, and everything that goes with putting his name to that figure and holding us to account. And I think it was Michael Lilly who raised the question, Councillor Lilly who raised the question earlier about the monitoring of these figures. And clearly in the past, we've had a very poor situation whereby very often, and this comes out a number of places in the quarterly report, that we will have quarterly figures which are collated and then presented at the end of the next quarter, and then come forward to the quarter after that, when finally Scrutiny and other groups will have a chance to look at them. That is not at all satisfactory. Any commercial organisation who is dealing with figures that were 3, 4, 5 or 6 months out of date would simply not accept that situation. They would require a different process to be put in place, and we are determined to do that. The exactitude of this budget further necessitates that attention to detail. So what I'm looking to do is to bring forward updates on a very regular basis, accepting that they may not be 100% accurate as we're still in the process of collating them, but it is imperative that we report those figures accurately to the council.
Thank you, Councillor John. Do your microphone for me. Questions? Cameron, Councillor Lilly, then Councillor Quirk.
I've got three. So the first one is to Councillor Andre. In her report, she mentions the bid for the new SEND school funding. Is there an update on that?
Thank you for your question, Cameron. I would like to say, yes, there is an update, but the update is that we haven't heard anything yet, but I can confirm that I think it was mentioned earlier that we need to be proactive. We have been very proactively engaged in conversations with the DFE, but as to date, we have not had an update, but thank you for your question.
The next one is to Councillor Jones-Evans. So what is the plan for growth to ensure a continual uptake and renewal of the one cards? I don't know, you mentioned earlier a review has happened into the leisure centres, and if those are looking as if particular ones or overall they cannot be as cost effective as they should be, or breaking even, or whatever the outcome of that report is there the likelihood of promoting more of the community model like we see in Freshwater and Ryde?
So everything's on the table at the moment. There was some work done about 2010 to look at different models, and the outcome of that review is actually the best way forward is actually to invest in leisure centres and keep the Isle of Wight Council keeping it. I think we're in difficult times at the moment, and there's many community models as well as local authority models and outsource models where these organisations are giving back the keys to the original owners because of the very, very difficult conditions. You may or may not be aware that the government have decided not to include swimming pools, leisure centres as part of the energy cap to other businesses. So the libraries, for instance, and museums have been included, but leisure centres not. So you can imagine there's a lot of lobbying going on at the moment, because that's quite worrying. But we're looking at nationally, we're looking at a bleak picture. So it's not a question of just going to a different model. It's actually, any model is actually very, very, very tricky at the minute. But we're coming back to the Isle of Wight. It's very, very important that we have these facilities for our community, but all the benefits that we have. And I said obviously about children swimming. I mean, did you know, even despite this, a statutory obligation, 1 in 3 primary school leave primary school still not being able to swim. Now, can you imagine that on the Isle of Wight? That's a real concern. So it's great to see in this performance that the one card price, sales are going up. That's continued for this month. We'll see. Sorry, January is our biggest month, and so we've got a new sales push for February. So yeah, nothing's. We have to look at everything, but it's the context. It's the local context and national context we need to look at.
And the last one is to Councillor Lucioni on the green waste collection. Is there a plan in place there to raise the uptake of that, and obviously making sure the council is commercially competitive in comparison to companies such as Biffa and Onward, which are currently cheaper than the council's model they're using?
Councillor Palin, thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about the waste service, because it's excellent on the Isle of Wight, I have to say. So what you want to know is we have a marketing budget alongside the 10,000 customers that we look for each year, which we've hit every year. So that includes direct communication with existing customers, people that have been on the list, including myself. So I'm hoping to get onto that this year because I've been waiting for a few years. Radio adverts, print of in Island media, etc., and social media, as you would expect. But to make it easier, it's only £8 a month, so you can pay monthly. And also, we have a 99.9% pickup rate. So we're at a different model, really. So you don't have to think. you put it out like you're recycling every week, so you don't have to phone up and ask for it to be collected, which would be brilliant for somebody like me. And also ours doesn't include, it doesn't charge extra VAT on top. So actually, we're very competitive compared to everybody else. Thank you.
On that point, it was noted that it was decided not to get an extra vehicle, despite there being a waiting list. There was no detail as to why. Why was that decision taken? Colin's going to answer it.
Oh, I was going to
You've got a reprieve. Turn your microphone off.
I've come to entertain you also. I believe it's because with the cost of living, etc., what an extra vehicle would mean 5,000 new customers. Was it 5,000 new customers? So yeah.
The garden waste service is run as a commercial service, and therefore, in order to justify additional vehicles, as Karen pointed out, you need at least 5,000 extra people to actually join the service. Otherwise, because you're talking about an extra vehicle, and these vehicles are about £500,000 each, plus you've got the additional revenue costs of the crew as well. So in order to actually justify the costs of that extra vehicle, you have to get enough customers to actually come through the service. Now, we do have a waiting list, but I think it's about 300 people. So we'd have to get significantly more people wanting to use the service in order for us to justify the additional costs of an additional vehicle.
So the break-even point for a vehicle is 5,000 customers. So 500,000 for the year.
So we've got around 10,000 customers now using 2 vehicles.
Sorry, that doesn't add up. Because at £96 each, 10,000 customers, let's call it £1 million for 2 vehicles currently. That would mean it's not operating at a profit. Correct me if I'm wrong, I'm quite happy to be corrected, but I'm just going back on the £500,000 because 5,000.
The £500,000 is a capital cost, Mr. Chairman.
Right.
So therefore, it's the cost of actually paying off the capital, plus the revenue costs of a crew and the other revenue costs, probably about 50,000–60,000 a year. So that's where the calculation comes in terms of trying to work out what the break-even point is.
That's fair enough, because I was concerned then that it was £500,000 break even. So yeah, thank you for clearing that up.
And also just to note that 8,000 people have already signed back up again. So we've got 2,000, which will open on the 24th of February.
Councillor Lilly.
Part of our role is obviously to look at the performance and monitor. So what I've done this time is just actually focused on 3 things, which actually I think, because we've been looking at the budget, we were looking at, is there evidence of actually maintaining within that budget? It's quite interesting to look through. And I've got 3 things, which I think are 3 good news stories.
We'll be the judge of that. Carry on.
One is on page 72. If you look at number of adults, 25 taking part in sport or physical activity, that is risen considerably, and especially I think from the is on target to increase higher than the actual figure than achieved last year. So actually more people are coming out after COVID side. My other one was on page 83 on performance measures, which is extremely important because if a child comes into care, it's a considerable cost which we have to pay, difficult to budget against. Well, actually, if you look at the numbers in November, the numbers are decreasing, which actually is quite a marked decrease, right, in that month. So actually, that's a good trend. And the last one on 103 was the floating bridge. I know we're going to talk about the floating bridge, but actually, if you look at the use of the floating bridge over the last 6 months, I think, we should highlight, there is some good news there because the numbers are considerably higher than before and quite consistent in both the passengers. They're down a bit over Christmas and December, but we're very high in the summer. And the actual use or the numbers of vehicles is quite considerable. So if you're actually looking about income generation and eating figures, there's evidence in this report that that's actually being achieved.
I will point it out, it's not your job to do the Cabinet's job for them. Our job is scrutiny, but I take the point. There's no need to carry on.
No, no. The balance, right? You should never criticize unless you also praise, right? And I think it's important to praise, and I actually are praising. I'm not doing their job. I'm pointing to the figures and actually saying there's some good news there.
Yeah, do it by email next time. I'm going to, if you don't mind, Councillor Quirk, I know Councillor Lever's got to go, but he wants to rate a put. Councillor Lever, then Councillor Quirk. Okay, tell me I've done a good job, I'll take it. Well, Councillor Lever, then Councillor Quirk.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one. Just on the, sorry, where am I looking? The Appendix 8. There's just a point about ICT secured a mini forest in the Isle of Wight Council name through a procurement exercise. Is there any more information on that? What is the mini forest? Where is it?
It's 1,500 trees is the answer. So it's part of the offset agreement, which is linked to the mobile phone contract. You'll notice in the budget that the provision for IT for device renewal is quite high. That's because a very large number of our devices this year fall out of the maintenance and contract agreement and are no longer supported under the current IT security guidelines, which are issued by a national body in the UK. And so we've had quite a protracted discussion with IT about that renewal program. You'll also remember that last year we changed the program from automatic renewal of devices to renewal when they were no longer economically repairable. So that pushed back a great deal of the upgrades which were planned last year within the cycle. The good news is that brought down our capital expenditure, which had an outturn in terms of our borrowing, which of course has come through into the treasury management saving, etc., etc. But the bottom line is we've now built up quite a big backlog of devices which cannot be upgraded to the version of the operating system that supports those security protocols. So we've got a bit of a hurdle going forward. And part of that negotiation, we were able to secure an offset of 1,500. You're going to ask me where the trees are going to be planted now?
Yeah, forgive me, Councillor. I appreciate the answer, but I wasn't inquiring about the phones. I was
but it's linked,
surprised to see that it was a deal between phones and trees.
It's part of the negotiation between the phones. It's linked to the Nokia offset agreement. I don't think they're all going to be planted in right hand centre.
Sorry, Councillor Lever, I know you've got to go. Does that answer your question? Because I have a real problem with offset, but I think that's
where I was leading. But yeah, I'll leave it to you, Chair.
I do think that's probably worthy of making note of for future reference, because I do struggle with this idea of offset.
Yes, I'd rather not consume the technology in the first place. That's always better.
Councillor Quirk and Councillor Down.
So, some of these graphs, like the number of adults taking exercise, there's no source for where the data comes from, and it would be really useful for where we have graphs to actually state what the source is, so we know whether it's a credible source or not. The second,
I agree, and we'll add it.
The second is we use the traffic light system. Yes, red, amber, green, that's fine. But on page 64, if you look at the bottom graph, capital expenditure is under budget. It gets green. It gets green because we've done nothing. That should actually be a black mark. We should have a black one where something is wrong, but actually appears to be by the traffic lights, giving us a good result. That isn't a good result. And in terms of the traffic lights, there's a lot of areas where we have a green target, but we've got a red result. And I think that those, all of those items, the relevant scrutiny committees during the year should be looking at them every time they meet, to see how we're progressing against where we're reds and we want to be green. Because if you're not looking at it, it's unlikely to change.
So I think the traffic light system should reflect performance against target, which I think is what you're saying.
What I'm saying is that you can have a target and you're meant to spend £20 million on regen, and if you spend nothing, you get a green light. That's bad. What we want to be doing is spend. So almost you need to have a black mark if you're not doing what's required of you. And if you want people to change, look at what they're doing and measure it and monitor it. So if you've got areas where we've got a red, want to be a green, they should be being looked at by the relevant scrutiny committee.
I do think it's a fair point. I think if we've got a traffic light system, it does need to be relevant. I also think we're in danger of seeing lots of green lights when what really we need to see is the red lights. I think that's the point of scrutiny. Councillor Andre.
If I may just add, I mean, it's actually, I think the official term is a ragging system because it's red, amber, green. And I think any analysis, we would be very foolish to actually just focus on one graph. So I'm sure we'd all agree that you always triangulate evidence. So it's only, I think it has to be put in context that those indicators, as it were, are only one measure. And it's important that we do look at different measures, not just one measure.
I accept that. However, we either got to decide that they're useful or not useful. That's the thing, is because if they're just part of a report because we think we need a report, then it's wasting everybody's time, especially officers' time in preparing it. So it's a fair point, Councillor Crookie.
Just coming back on that, the important thing is that someone's looking at it. And if it goes to scrutiny and it comes back and they say, why on earth are we looking at this? This is the wrong measure. That's good scrutiny. If they're finding it and saying, this one, it triangulates with something else and overall it's okay, but someone should be looking at that. And that's the point of scrutiny. So that's why it should be going back to the individual scrutiny committees.
So I think we'll take that fully on board. One thing I should have pointed out at the beginning is did a rationalisation process. Almost every section of this report previously, every chart used a different annotation for the year. So one would find in one chart it was a circle, another was a triangle, another was a square for 22-23. You'll find that those are all consistent now. And I think those continual improvements in your feedback are very important.
Appreciate it, Councillor John. Good outcome, Councillor Court. Well done. Councillor Downer.
I do apologise, Chairman, it's going back to the trees. Councillor Jarman, do we know with these trees that are going to be planted, what species and varieties are going to be planted? Thank you. Because we want a good lock-up of carbon. The more leaf cover, the more CO2 they're going to take in.
I will endeavour to find out.
While I think about it, and sorry to go off topic, but I think that when we come to this at another time, the idea of offset and whatever, I think we do really need to decide a strategy of what offset is, because if there's money available, we're as well to buy farmland on the island than we are to sell, a tree somewhere else. I won't labour the point. Any further questions on quarterly performance? No, I won't. Michael's put his phone away. I'll carry on while he's distracted. Point 10, floating bridge. Who's taking this one? No one.
I'm here to answer questions, Chair.
Yes, sorry, you are indeed. So we received the report. We had an informal meeting. We're in the process of written to Cabinet to ask for permission for a couple of members to see the non-disclosure agreement. That process is being finalised and I believe is almost complete, at which stage we'll be able to decide that. Other than that, it's really, we had a chance to have our peak performances before. So if there's any further clarification on that particular process from anybody. Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Chair. Two separate points on the floating bridge, if I may. I asked a question at our online briefing last week, which was when was the decision to delegate authority by the leader to the relevant cabinet member and director of neighbourhoods. When was that published on the website? I'm grateful to the monitoring officer for coming back on that today. The answer is it wasn't. A mediation was concluded and reported on before the decision to delegate that authority was even published on the website. It eventually was published in November of this year. I think that's worrying, and it's hardly surprising that people have concerns about what went on in mediation when basic procedural issues like that were omitted. I'm not looking to apportion blame. I don't know whose fault it was, but I think it's remarkable, and I'm grateful for that written response.
Would it have changed the outcome? Is that the point you're making?
I think it raises concerns, given that the outcome is a secret. I think it adds to the concerns about an outcome being secret, that basic process leading up to mediation has not been followed. That's my point. But if I may, my second point, which is actually a question, is part of the documents that were disclosed to us for our online meeting included a sort of progress update spreadsheet of the Gateway 5 monitoring review. And I appreciate there's been email traffic today, which is what I want to refer to. Can I ask, when will costings be available that demonstrates the finances of Floating Bridge 5 and the finances of Floating Bridge 6, so that the Cabinet can be informed as to whether they continue with Floating Bridge 6 definitely, or whether they might want to commission a new vessel? So my question is, when will we have those basic costings to allow the Cabinet to make a decision?
In answer to Councillor Robertson, that those costings are being prepared now, so they will have them within the next week or so.
Thank you.
And just so I'm clear, what you want from the outcome of that, Councillor Robertson, what do you, so compared to Floating Bridge 5, Floating Bridge 6, what would you want to be able to ascertain from that?
So I don't want any more than what's in that spreadsheet. I think it's item 11 or 18, I can't remember which cell it is on that spreadsheet, which basically to allow the Cabinet to make a decision over whether to pursue a new floating bridge or not, a basic cost analysis of how much it will cost to operate Floating Bridge 6 as compared to the benefits of Floating Bridge 5 should be made. Because the cabinet member wrote in the Observer on the 12th of October 2021, so over a year ago, that he would be making a decision as to whether to commission a new bridge or not, and that there would be a cost analysis, obviously, to inform that decision. I don't think we've had that cost analysis, so it's hardly surprising we haven't had a decision. The decision may be that they're going to continue with Floating Bridge 6 forevermore with a push vote. If that's the decision, let's hear that it's been made. But as far as I understand, the financial analysis has not been done to make that decision, and we're now halfway through this current council term.
It might just be me, but as I understand it, Floating Bridge 5 can't come back into service. So the comparison with 5 and 6 is almost pointless. It'd be 6 and 7, surely.
Chair, I'm just using the spreadsheet that's been provided by the relevant directorate. And that spreadsheet says there will be a cost analysis of the profitability of 5, the losses on 6, and that data will inform a decision as to whether a new floating bridge might be required or whether they can carry on with Floating Bridge 6. It's nothing more than what's already in that spreadsheet and has already been disclosed to this committee. And in that line on that spreadsheet, it says this cost analysis target date was June 2022. We're now February 2023. I've asked when it will be forthcoming, and I'm grateful for the answer in the coming weeks.
And on your point, I think actually in terms of scrutiny, I think we're in danger of missing something if we're just focusing on history. I think we actually want to know what it would be compared to a replacement vessel. Sorry, Colin, if you'd like to respond, save me waffling. Yeah, Councillor Jordan.
I'll just come in first. Just a bit of context, that report was written in June of last year, and it talked about comparison of cost between Floating Bridge 5, Floating Bridge 6, and the cost of another vehicle. What we've done in terms of the exchange today is the further developments that went on with that report that went to the Solent LEP in terms of the chain depth report, which came out after that June date and actually provided more context, particularly in terms of the cost of thrusters, which was one of the options, versus the use of the push boat, and also looking at what is the actual cost of a new vessel compared with the benefits that we get with the current vessel. The other thing that's happened since then, and the meeting, the Solent LEP had a meeting last week where they basically relieved us of the notice that they'd served on us in terms of performance, because they're satisfied now that we've had over 9 months of good performance, and we saw the performance figures there in terms of the operation of the bridge. So in terms of the conversation about do we actually implement a new vessel, I think it's less urgent now than it was. It's not to say we don't have that debate, but given where we are from the conversation and the report that we've had, an independent report on the performance of the vessel and the chain depth issue, and the fact that there isn't a silver bullet available to sort out that chain depth issue, but we are looking at the push boat, that's the reason why we've delayed the actual information that's coming through. I hope that's helpful, but that's the reason why we haven't urgently looked at the costs and haven't urgently done a business case to say, what would a new vessel look like?
Councillor Jordan.
Don't really need to add much more to that, Chair, other than that when we are not in a position to make the sort of definitive decisions that are being suggested here. When we are, and we've done our proper and due diligence and research and reports on it, we'll report back to Scrutiny, obviously we will. But it's not a question of making a decision, give me a date. That's not how it works. It just doesn't work that way. Not doing that.
Just for clarity, I'm not asking for a date for a decision. I've made it very, very clear. I'm asking when the financial analysis that the department's own spreadsheet has said is overdue, when that will be provided. I'm grateful to the director for the answer, but it is 2 years through this council term nearly, and there was a promise made that a decision by the cabinet would be forthcoming as to whether a new bridge is going to be ordered or not. I share no opinion on whether that should happen because, like you, Councillor Jordan, I haven't seen the financial data. So let's see it, and then you can make your decision you've been promising for nearly 2 years.
So if you believe, Councillor Robertson, that a decision to replace the floating bridge is based on performance of the existing or the previous float, if that's what you believe it's made on, then I suggest that you relook at what your scope of your work is in this committee, because that is not the only or sole consideration about replacing that vessel. If you think it's on finances, you are badly mistaken. Badly, badly, badly mistaken.
Check your own column in the Observer dated 12th of November 2021. It's exactly what you said. You were waiting for this report, this spreadsheet, this data, and it still hasn't been populated. It's your own words in public.
I'm afraid not. You're mistaken. I'm sorry, I can't, Chair. You are mistaken.
We'll move on. We've made the point. Councillor Robinson, I'm sure, will make sure that that's followed up. Cameron.
All I was going to say was, whilst the SLEP may have relieved you of that order, we've also got to take into consideration, which I'm sure you are, the fact that not that long ago, the bridge broke down in the water, leaving many, individuals, including one of the editors of the county press, stranded in the middle of the water whilst that vessel broke down. So it's not just about the finance, it is about the community and actually the fact that this vessel, well, it may be reliable in the statistics, but the incidents that do still take place are very much a massive consideration for the local community, which I know the cabinet member does take on board.
To repeat, look, what's in the report in front of you, it has been running at 98.6% of scheduled hours over the last 6 months, certainly the last quarter anyway. In fact, if you look at November and December, it's 99, it's 100% and 99%, but the average is 98.6%. Gives you an idea of the reliability of the vessel. And as the director said, because of that reliability, because we made changes to the design of the vessel by replacing the rams and realigning the prows. It's become even more reliable. Could have been done a long time ago, but it wasn't. We've done that. It's become reliable, and the pressures of this council to provide that crossing is being made as it is. That's not to say that we are not, and we are looking at all options, and it could be modification of that vessel. The chain depth height is a problem, whether it's this vessel or a new vessel to be resolved. That will be looked at, and a number of other issues. And Cameron's absolutely right. Part of the consideration is the two communities and making sure they're connected.
Last word to Councillor Love briefly, if you would.
Thank you. So I'm one of the two ward councillors that backs onto it. I'm satisfied that everything is being done that can be done at this time. I very rarely take any notice of the statistical data, to be honest, because it's about what the people experience. And I accept that whilst the bridge is running, it is running far slower than it was ever built to be. But I also accept that that is the sacrifice that's had to be made in order to make it operational. And my view will never change. This vessel, has to be replaced from my perspective. And I would rather that a proper, considered decision is made based on the facts of its operation and what the people think, because this is about reputational damage as well, and that's important to our economic growth in this particular area as well. So I would hope that we would be able to move fairly quickly and soon towards making the ultimate decision of what action is going to be taken with it. And I want to make sure before I provide any comments that what I'm saying is based on fact, and then mix that with the community need.
Okay, any further questions? No, jolly good. Moving on to members' questions. Any additional questions? I didn't even need to look. Councillor Lilly.
I have two. One is quite a quick one, which is many years ago, we had a large payment from Asda. And my question is, and I don't expect an answer now, but I would like a question to come back, exactly where that money has gone. I think from a corporate scrutiny point of view, it's important for us to actually ask that question. So where did the Asda money go? Simple as that. I'd like to ask that question.
We did look at this. It was absorbed into general funds and spent over a 3.5 year period, just on general expenses. No substantial purposeful use was made to any of it. We looked at it straight when we came in.
Is it possible to have a little bit more detail on that? My other question is about poverty, and I think it's important that a report has just come out from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, which is called The Essential Guide to Understanding Poverty 2023. It's an excellent report because it brings all the kind of data together, includes a map that you can actually identify the Isle of Wight on, and we identified a higher in poverty, the sort of colour coded, than other parts of the southeast. And my question is really well, in 2019, I put a motion to the council of 16th of January 2019, which was passed by the council at that time, which said that this council was committed to reduction of child poverty to the highest group. Pensioners and children are the highest group that are really hit by poverty, to reduce child poverty on this island in 5 years. We are now in the 4th year, So I actually feel that this committee should review actually how we tackle poverty. Have we actually reduced it in those 5 years, and actually report back? I have found out today that Health Watch are actually undertaking a study on poverty, which I didn't know when I put this forward. So perhaps there could be a conversation with Health Watch that we could actually link up and make sure that different departments feed into that within that. And the last point, I just really want to emphasize how poverty. I was in a school this week and talking to the head, where she, and I'm not going to point out where that school was, but it was saying half the children, right, were tired and exhausted because they didn't have proper bedding or were in overcrowded rooms, and actually there was a need for a washing machine at the school because some of the children literally had mold on their clothes. This is Dickensian, right? But this is happening. And one of the things that the foundation, Joseph Foundation, was 69% of people in poverty across the UK, so on the island, are in deep poverty since COVID. And actually 29, I think the other percentage are in very, no, 29% of that 69% are in very deep poverty. And I think that we really do need, as a committee, to actually dig deeper on this.
I think the thing to do is we scope it and include it in our work plan, Councillor Lilly, because you're right, it is essential. Councillor Andre.
Thank you, Chair. If I can just give a brief response. I'm very happy, of course, to have that conversation. I will prepare a detailed response for you, Councillor Lilly. Just to highlight a couple of things. This has to be a multi-agency, multifaceted approach. And we have some extremely good initiatives that are being carried out by the voluntary sector, but also being supported by measures that we are implementing as a council, mainly through the Connected Communities Household Support Fund, which comes through my portfolio. Namely, the community pantries, which actually run alongside, which run alongside the food banks. We also are in our second year now of running the extremely successful holiday activities and food schemes for children, which directly offer to children on free school meals activities during holidays with a hot, healthy meal. And I do know that a lot of the providers, and we have usually about 10 providers offering different activities. They do actually, any food meals that are left over, they do actually give to the families when they come to collect the children. So there are a lot of measures in place. As I say, I will give you that detailed response. The last point I'd like to make, though, is that we are now in a situation where, because of, we all know we've had a series of events, shall we say, with rising inflation, there's that feeling that we are trying to stay ahead of the game. So I think the point that you've raised, it's really important that we have that conversation and that we look at as many ways as we possibly can, as all working together with partner agencies to do as much as we can to lift our island children out of poverty. Thank you.
I think it'd be useful if we all got to see that, and I think it'd also be useful to include the updated version of that when it comes to the committee's work plan. Did you want to say one?
I just wanted to say that the Joseph Rowntree report is very comprehensive, and in a sense, can we get a local version of that in a sense of breaking that down, because it does actually cover all aspects of poverty. And I think it's a very good guide to actually get the detail. That
As
we
you said,
showed.
Health Watch are doing this, rather than several people going away and doing the same thing.
They have got that report that I've given them today, and they're going to use that particular report. Yeah, thank you.
Any further members' questions? No, well, thank you all attending. It was light till about 5:30, so things are changing. Thank you again. Thank you, committee, for keeping it nice and focused. It was a bit lively, but that's the point. And see you all soon.
Apologies, Chair, about the noise there. Just some